Hey everyone, welcome to this 49th webinar on a treatise on cosmic fire. This webinar series is available on makara.us. Whoops, try that again. Under the subheadings Moria Federation webinars, then webinar series in progress as shown here. All episodes of this, the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and the Secret Doctrine series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar that you wish to view. You can join any of these webinars on the homepage of MoriaFederation.com. In case you misplace your invitation, email invitation, just go here to the homepage and these give you a hard link to the webinars. Okay. Last month, we continued with the subsection entitled The Centers and the Senses, Normal and Supernormal. We began last session with a study of the sequential mastery of sound, that how we come into a gradual understanding and mastery of sound, esoterically understood. DK tells us the key for man to discover in turn concerns itself with revealing the mystery of, and then he gives us 5 headings, his own sound. This is the long process of experience, evolutional experience, that where one discovers oneself, know thyself. And then when one enters onto the path, one then begins to recognize and discover, quote unquote, his brother's sound at a much higher stage of evolution on the mental plane. The group sound, his group sound is known. This is where group consciousness comes into play and becomes available. And then at the 4th initiation, the sound of that one of the heavenly men with whom he is connected, being, of course, Sanat Kumara, but also by ray type, any one of the other logoi, which will then provide the soul experience connected with those rays and those planets. And then finally, the sound of the logos, meaning the solar logos, or the sound of nature, of the solar system, of the grand man of the heavens. That would be at 5th, 6th, sequentially unfolding at the 5th, 6th, and 7th initiations as one attunes to the quote-unquote sound of one's monad. DK then relates each type of sound to a particular plane. One's own sound to the physical plane, one's brother's sound to the astral plane, one's group sound to the mental plane, the note of the planetary logos to the Buddhic plane, and the note logoic to the Atmic plane. We then learned about clairaudience, or hearing on the astral plane, noting that due to the fluidic nature of the astral vehicle, quote, a man hears all over his vehicle and not only through the specialized organs. One would like to know a lot more about this, just how does that work? Do we have, does our astral sheath have ears? And if so, what is their function if indeed a man hears all over the astral vehicle? Next, we learned that even on the physical plane, humans have a limited range of hearing, not only circumscribed by frequency limitations, but also by the fact that our consciousness does not yet allow us to hear the various groups sounds, including the note of nature itself. This suggests a different type of sound altogether, which might include the subjective note sounded forth by the kingdoms of nature, of nations and races, and of a great forest or mountain. MDR makes the point that all these limitations are enforced by Saturn, who rules sound on the physical plane. DK then notes that, quote, hearing on the mental plane is simply an extension of the faculty of differentiating sound, and that hearing on all three of the lower subplanes of the cosmic physical plane is a means of apprehending the nature of form or the not self. This is an important takeaway line concerning hearing, which is it is completely concerned, at least in the lower quaternary, with understanding the form nature of creating a cognizance of the not self. DK then contrasts the threefold faculty of hearing with telepathy, which he tells us proceeds from mind to mind, bypassing the senses altogether. And finally, DK says, when the extension of hearing becomes such that it concerns the psyche, then we call it telepathy. This would be on the higher mental planes. Or that wordless communication, that is the synthesis of hearing on all the three lower planes, and which is known by the ego in the causal body on the formless levels of the mental plane. And this takes us up to where we left off last time. So first of all, I want to encourage you to speak up, ask questions. If you have any comments, thoughts about anything that's presented, raise your hand, and Mikhail will call on you, or I will. So, could we get a reader for this next section?
And Parker.
Okay. On the Buddhic plane, hearing, now of the synthetic quality called telepathy, demonstrates as complete comprehension, for it has involved two things. Number one, a knowledge and recognition of individual sound. Two, a similar knowledge of group sound, and their complete unification. This causes the most perfect comprehension and is the secret of the master's power. On the atmic plane, this perfected hearing is seen as beatitude, sound the basis of existence, sound the method of being, sound the final unifier, sound therefore realized as the raison d'etre, as the method of evolution, and therefore as beatitude.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, so first, on the Buddhic plane, hearing, now of the synthetic quality called telepathy, important fact to keep in mind, demonstrates as complete comprehension. Okay, so, prior to this, we've gone through how sound demonstrates on the three lower planes. I just did a recap of that, and here's where we're stepping in, is sound as it occurs and how it's experienced on the Buddhic plane. So we have a fundamental shift here from apprehension of the not-self to a means of expanding one's consciousness. At this stage, it would be initiate consciousness. For the higher forms of telepathy, not only include knowledge gained through information, that's the way we normally think of telepathy, but also this particular quality called complete comprehension of that which is imparted. Complete comprehension includes both meaning and significance, which are both soul qualities. This level of hearing seems similar to that gained through the intuition, the Buddhic sense of taste, which DK describes as direct knowing. We might also note that in an earlier statement, DK appended the word comprehension with the term of four sounds, suggesting that meaning and significance is gained through the sound emanating from both the form and formless subplanes of the lower four planes. Okay, any thoughts about this? So next we have for complete comprehension has involved two things. One, a knowledge and recognition of individual sound. Two, a similar knowledge of group sound and their complete unification. It's funny, he doesn't include a brother's sound. I would think it would actually include all three capacities, though possibly a brother's sound is folded into one's ability to recognize group sound. So this statement takes us way beyond the usual meaning of mental comprehension. Earlier, we learned that on the physical plane, the individual sound has been recognized and understood. On the astral, the same recognition and understanding have applied to a brother's note. Group sound has been recognized and understood on the mental plane, especially the higher mental plane. DK now tells us that on the Buddhic plane, complete unification of these three lower forms of gained understanding takes place, bringing forth a higher synthetic understanding, termed here comprehension, which manifests on the lowest subplane of the Buddhic plane. So comprehension at this level is not just a synthesized understanding of imparted information, but also allows one to identify with the key ideas with which the expressed thought form have their origin. Let me say that again. That it allows one to identify that particular word that DK uses, which is come into identicality with, merge into the sense of these key ideas with which the expressed thought forms have their origin. So not only are the thought forms transmitted, but they're the key ideas from which those thought forms have their origin is spontaneously recognized and identified with. Okay, next, this causes the most perfect comprehension and is the secret of the master's power. So perfect comprehension means that nothing is left out, that the full scope of an idea has been integrated into the master's consciousness, as described before. The master actually comes into, is able to identify with the idea from which the thought form emanated. There's so much wrong reception and assimilation that comes to the faculty of speech and hearing in the lower quaternary. But once the direct impression of higher mental and Buddhic telepathy is truly functioning, not only is all misunderstanding removed, but truth as a conditioning quality blazes forth. One then lives and communicates nothing but truth. This is what DK calls the light of reason. Yes, Joe.
This one is complicated. I was thinking about synthenesia as related only to sound, and then I realized, no, that's not true. It seems to me that synthenesia would include all the senses. And so I guess what I end up with is two synthesis points, and I know I'm starting from the top and working down, but I'm trying to sort out on your chart how that would function.
Yeah, I think it probably works from the bottom up. Synesthesia is the quality you're describing, and it's it's often associated with the ability to uh, uh, hear light or color, and see sound. So there's this uh, blending of those two senses, sound and sight, right? But it only stands to reason that all combinations of the senses could be experienced in a synesthesic, whatever that verb is, right? Synesthesiistic way, right? That you could function, that you could gain that sense of synthesis between any of the two. And it'd be interesting to ponder what those would look like. For instance, I've heard magicians that seem to synthesize uh, the sense of hearing and touch at the same time. It's literally like they touch you, and they with the sound they produce, and at the same time they are employing the sense of touch within themselves as they create sound. And this creates a much more powerful experience than just sounding forth, right?
Well, you've introduced two of the major three. All you got to do is add light.
Well, yeah, well, that's the usual synesthesia, sight and hearing. It's a usual sense. So I was adding touch to that, and that would give the three major ones.
Can I ask one more thing?
Sure, go ahead, Joe.
I've been struggling with comprehension of four sounds and thinking that we have to be able to understand on all four of the lower four of the five levels.
Yeah.
And then we get to the fifth level, maybe. But I also have been applying, if the concept of combining all four is useful with sound, it also becomes as useful with each of the other senses. So,
Right. It's just that the other senses, uh, you could say, reach up into the higher subplanes. You know, um, Sound is very much connected with the recognition of the not self, and therefore the physical plane, and by extension, physical, astral, and lower mental. As
that
as
in itself is really helpful.
well, good. Yeah,
Sound is most accessible.
yeah. Fourness often relates to the lower quaternary, which is a word for four. Uh, to the cube, the imprisoning square, that kind of idea, which is the form aspect, the not self. And it's so very particularly related, sound is very particularly related to that level of, I was going to say reality, but it's actually unreality, you know. Okay. Barbara.
Yeah, so some of the sound theorists um, are able to detect the sounds along the spine and the sounds of the sushumna. The clarity of the sound is how open the channel is. And it's possible also to measure the sounds in the head of the various cavities in the head. And these are said to affect the crown chakra.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. Yeah. Go ahead.
um, so I'm wondering if um, if in the crown chakra, there's the incoming sound of the master meeting the sound at the Buddhic plane. And does this affect the jewel in the lotus?
Yeah, I would think that would come through recognition of the group sound. That's what would open up. I think group sound, higher mental plane, and the head center are all deeply connected. And this then becomes the portal, or one characteristic of the portal that leads one to the fourth initiation, leads one forward into the higher subplanes, which is initially the lowest subplane of the Buddhic plane, where then one is able to identify with the note of the planetary logos, right? But I love your description of the sounds of the cavities in the head and the sounds of the various chakras. It's not something I'd really thought of. We normally think of the chakras in terms visually, with its spinning and its colors, fiery qualities, but certainly they're going to also emit tones, that would be revelatory of their nature, and those cavities in the head probably are very much related to the 7 chakras in the head, which would also have their own tones, and they wouldn't just be a single tone. They would be chords, that would be indicative of their nature. They would reveal their nature for, quote unquote, one who has ears to hear, right? Great thoughts. Thanks, Barbara. Anyone else? All right. Next. On the Atmic plane, this perfected hearing is seen as beatitude. Sound, the basis of existence. Sound, the method of being. Sound, the final unifier. Sound, therefore, realized as the raison d'être, as the method of evolution, and therefore as beatitude. So there's a lot here, and I want to take this sentence by sentence. So first we have, on the Atmic plane, this perfected hearing is seen as beatitude. Apart from this statement, there are only 3 short passages in all the blue books that cite the term beatitude. So could we get a reader for these 3? You can see the one's from ToCF, one's from Light of the Soul, and one's from Externalization of the Hierarchy. Reader, please.
And Veronica.
Hello.
Hello.
Hearing. Beatitude. This is realized through the not self. Through the part, the whole is contacted and an expansion of consciousness takes place, involving bliss or joy. Beatitude always follows upon realization of the unity of the part with the whole. The experience of progress may be the response of the human heart to the heart of God, leading to the mystical beatitude and to the recognition of spiritual being.
Thank you, Amber.
Externalization. May I ask, is it realized through the not self, through the low quaternary beatitude, because it's quite high?
Yeah, well, in other words, one must go through the experience of recognizing, understanding the true nature of the not self through hearing before one is ushered into the higher planes where the beatitude is experienced. Right. So
Okay.
the not, this realized through the not self means that's the preparatory work for experiencing the beatitude. The actual beatitude is an experience of the true self. not
Okay.
of the not-self. It's not an experience of the not-self. It's realized as a result of having identified and transcended the not-self. My favorite here, of course, is this last one, buried in externalization of the hierarchy. You know, where he describes it as the response of the human heart to the heart of God. Right. This very much relates it to the Buddhic plane, right, which is where this experience is gained. Okay. Yes, Joe.
Boy, I'm going to take a leap here and hope everybody bears with me. I'm looking at this incredible illustration that you have chosen, and every angle of that is speaking to me, and obviously not with a, a vocal sound. It's more like I'm identifying maybe, but it's like you can start. I noticed even the fringe. I thought, oh my goodness, I think I can even feel those chords that are little knots all the way around the whole feeling itself. If you look at the heart, obviously we all have a feeling about, oh, that rose, it smells, but it's a particular color. It means love, And
Yeah.
you can do that with everything. And I don't know where sound begins and ends, maybe. I don't know. Just a thought.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love this. And the
Ex-
reason I chose this is because it kind of exemplifies this idea of response of the human heart to the heart of God. And we kind of see that. This is really, to me, an illustration of that response. I love it too. The idea that, you have the 5 roses, the 5 doves, but you have the 7 swords, which represents this painful ascent through the 7 subplanes of the cosmic physical plane, and then the flowering forth. Yeah, it's really beautiful. Thank you, Joe. Anyone else? Okay. Next up. So we're going through this paragraph and talking about each phrase here. Right. So yeah. So next, sound, the basis of existence. Sound, the method of being. So through sound, the triple logoi created and sustained all existence. Could we get a reader, please, for this? This is the triple logoi.
Yeah, Barbara, do you want to read?
Yes. The human kingdom, the 4th creative hierarchy, was produced by a triple Om, sounded in a particular key by 3 persons of the Trinity in unison: God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, or Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. This sound is still going forth. There are 3 words committed by the solar logos to each of the 3 logoi as follows. A, the sacred sound A to Shiva, he who embodies the spirit or will aspect. It is the word through which God the Father works. B, the sound U to Vishnu, God the Son. He is the form builder and provides the body which the spirit must occupy, thereby making divine incarnation possible. A is the life sound, U is the form sound. The sound M to Brahma, who in his work of energy provider links an active intelligent spirit and form, or the self and not self.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, this is part of a fascinating section in the new Initiation Human and Solar. You can find it, just go to page 152 and read before and after this. It's one of the most descriptive sections in the Blue Books about the creation, solar logoic creation through sound, solar and planetary logoic creation through sound. Okay, and next we have sound, the final unifier. So first, through the agency of Fohat, sound unites spirit and spirit and form. When that form has served its purpose, sound is once again used to free the indweller from the now restrictive form and progressively unify it with ever higher and more subtle forms. Can we get a reader for this short passage?
Gordon. Want to read?
By the sounding of this note, that of Shiva the destroyer, the not self is negated, and all that is not of spirit passes into dissolution. It is the coming in of the A sound which effects the severance or liberation of the initiate from the three worlds.
Thank you, Gordon. And also, more specifically, from a form that has been outworn, that has been transcended, right? So you have this sequential use of these three sounds. And by the way, these three sounds are actually great fields of sound reality. It's not just A, U, and M. Each of those represents a whole series of sounds that are more specific and used specifically within their category. So, you might use when it's time to move into a more appropriate form, first the sound from the A school of sounds, you might say, is used to break the hold of the outer form on the indweller. And then a Brahmic sound, the sound of view, the sound of form, would then be employed to attract the next highest and now more appropriate form. And then Fohat would bind the indweller with that new form. And then you would have the M that would intensify that form's concretion, you could say, around the indweller. So this isn't just three stages, where you have this release, though you can look at it in the big picture as three stages. In fact, those three stages happen many, many times over as one progresses up through the realm of forms on each of the subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. Okay. So next, sound, therefore, realized as a raison d'être, as the method of evolution, and therefore as beatitude. Sound is the raison d'être, or reason for being. Is very similar to the idea that sound is the basis of existence, both meaning that the fourth kingdom in nature was created through sound and will eventually, again through sound, transcend the fourth kingdom. This is what I was just talking about, this combination of these great schools of sound, the Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahmic aspects, which are the A, U, and M, in various combinations would release the fourth kingdom in nature and usher it into the fifth. So the idea that sound is the method of evolution is further explored in Initiation, Human, and Solar. Could we get a reader for this? By the way, I I generated this image in, um, um, through artificial intelligence. And sometimes you have to be real patient and keep changing the wording when you're asking for these images. But I got such a chuckle out of this one that I had to include it. So just by the way, reader, please.
Yeah. Janet.
It's a very delightful image, isn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, I think so.
In connection with the first three kingdoms, it may be of interest to note that they are based upon two sounds. The U sounded on the basic keynote of the M. In the fourth kingdom, the M tone is dying down, and the two notes sounded fourth are the U and the A. In the fifth kingdom, the M has subsided into a distant undertone. The U is blended with it so as to be indistinguishable, and the A or the Shiva note is pealing forth in power and is practically the only note heard.
So I find this very insightful. You know, it's still just the ABCs of how sound works, but it is I think an important insight into how these three sounds are used, and where we are. You know, we are primarily driven by, as the fourth kingdom, as the human kingdom, by the notes U and A, with the M tone dying down, right? So we've already really transcended that purely material, substantive aspect, even even in the fourth kingdom. You know, this is thanks to the Manasa Putras who are overshadowing our efforts, right? But when we move into the fifth kingdom, then the M recedes into, what does he say, a distant undertone, and it's the A note that is pealing forth in power. So I find this a very beautiful passage. Okay, and finally, and therefore as beatitude. When the indweller has achieved soul union, it is the experience of sound as beatitude that dissolves any impediments that prevent contact with the monad. All right, let's take a look at the footnote. Referenced by this phrase, and therefore as beatitude. Can we get a reader for this, please?
Joe, you want to read?
I'd like to read. The chief agency by which nature's wheel is moved in a phenomenal direction is sound. Sound is the first aspect of the manifested pentagon, since it is a property of ether called akas. And as I already said, Vedic recitation is the highest yagnam, containing in itself all minor yagnams and tending to preserve the manifested pentagon in the proper order. In the opinion of our old philosophers, sound or speech is, next to thought, the highest karmic agent used by man. Of the various karmic agencies wielded by man in the way of molding himself and surroundings, sound or speech is the most important, for to speak is to work in either, which of course rules the lower quaternary of elements, air, fire, water, and earth. Human sound or language contains therefore all the elements required to move the different classes of devas, and those elements are of course the vowels and the consonants. The details of the philosophy of sound in its relation to the devas who preside over the subtle world belong to the domain of true mantra sastra, which of course is in the hands of the knowers. That's from Some Thoughts on the Gita, page 72.
Thank you, Joe. Okay. Right. You guys are having a good time?
Okay, that's from the Gita. It's one of the
Okay, you need to mute, Joe. Okay, there we go. Um, glad you're having so much fun with this. All right. I hope the rest of you are as delighted by this footnote as Joe is. So in 1893, the Kumbakonam branch of the Theosophical Society in South India issued Thoughts on the Bhagavad Gita by, quote unquote, a Brahmin FTS, which means Fellow of the Theosophical Society. The book, now quite rare, was based on a series of lectures presented to that local branch. The fact that DK includes such an extensive quote from this publication in TCF indicates the importance of this work. And I have read through most of it, and it is there's some great stuff. So let's take a look at the footnote. First, the chief agency by which nature's wheel is moved, hang on a sec, in a phenomenal direction is sound. Sound is the first aspect of the manifested pentagon, since it is a property of ether called akas. Okay, nature's wheel moved in a phenomenal direction refers to involutional form building, the involutional form building phase of creation, which includes both first and second life waves. The manifested pentagon refers to all potencies of the lower 5 systemic planes of the cosmic physical plane. The Atmic plane, whereon Fohat manifests as sound, stands at the apex of this pentagram. In this section of Some Thoughts on the Gita, sound is related to the akasha through the word akas. As here presented, sound and the word akas are synonymous. Okay, next. And as I already said, Vedic recitation is the highest yagnam, containing in itself all minor yagnams and tending to preserve the manifested pentagon in the proper order. So exoterically, a yagnam is a sacrificial ritual, but as here used, it suggests the idea of creative potency. Sound, being the highest yagnam, holds all lesser yagnams in place because sound has an inherent ordering potency through frequency. Next, in the opinion of our old philosophers, sound or speech is, next to thought, the highest karmic agent used by man. This is an idea also emphasized by the Tibetan. Through sound, we can both create and dissolve karma. Ultimately, however, thought is given preeminence as a karmic agent, for as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Next, of the various karmic agencies wielded by man in the way of molding himself and surroundings, sound or speech is the most important. For to speak is to work in ether, which of course rules the lower quaternary of elements, air, fire, water, and earth. It's a very esoteric statement. So speech is a great formative agency, manifesting in etheric substance the patterns and qualities of thought forms that precipitate on the physical plane in the form of actions. a reality well known by initiates and true magicians, though often ignored by average humanity. Thus, when we speak with harmlessness and self-forgetfulness, our words have the potential to carry the light of the soul and thereby to serve. Next. Human sound, or language, contains therefore all the elements required to move the different classes of devas, and those elements are, of course, the vowels and the consonants. So in magical practice, vowels are like verbs, providing the agency of movement, and consonants are like nouns, descriptors of that which is to be affected by these verb-like vowels, together providing all that is needed to activate the Devic and elemental realms. But the compelling potency of a verbal command and the resulting effect that a command has on the Deva kingdom is greatly enhanced and really dependent on whether the magician has purity of character or not, and a selflessly directed intention. Finally, the details of the philosophy of sound and its relation to the devas who preside over the subtle world belong to the domain of the mantra shastra, which, of course, is in the hands of the knowers. The knowers are the masters and initiates who guide the Deva kingdom through sound manipulation, called in Hindi Dhavani. That's the word for sound manipulation. Mantra Shastra includes the science of pronunciation and chanting, by which its students become adept at recognizing and using the energies associated with different sounds. Okay, so thoughts or questions on anything from this footnote? Yes, I see Barbara. Yes, go ahead, Barbara.
Yes, so sound, according to some theorists, is limited in its effect without the geometry of the rays of light. And even speaking here of cooperation with the devas are described as beings of light. So I think for in complex situations, I mean, even describing the pentagon, you can't put sound in a pentagon without rays of light, without the geometry that the rays of light provide. So I think at a certain level that there sound needs to cooperate with light geometry, and I think this is what the devas do.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's well said. The devas, DK talks about Devic hearing, and the white magician eventually comes into awareness of this property of the devas, and that forms a unique connection between the white magician and the Devic and elemental kingdoms. But we have to always remember this synesthesia, this quality of synesthesia, for lack of a better word, that where sound, when one is working with a synthesized series of senses, that one can impact the Deva kingdom with more than just sound at the same time, right? That one could also be, for instance, visualizing the geometry and the light involved and animating it or sending it forth on waves of sound. Yeah, I think DK describes these senses separately just because it's easier to understand when it's done that way. But he also makes the comment more than once that you know, at a certain point, well, he just made it back a few paragraphs ago that, at a certain point, you can't really tell where one leaves off and the next begins, that they're so interconnected. Um, and certainly a master of the wisdom who would be working with such Davic beings, I would think would be using and projecting into the Davic kingdom all uh, all those sensory forms that would be most effective for animating the Davic world. As Joe.
I'm going to say this was a kinesthetic experience to hear you speak through this. As it's even your vowels and consonants were resonant with the material that you were presenting.
Well, thank you, Joe.
It's just amazing the sensitivity that is in this reading. I mean, I'm saying yes, your reading, but yes, what DK chose to
Yeah,
include. Amazing.
yeah. This is quite a little book. This Some Thoughts on the Gita. It's after you've read DK for a few decades, you get attuned to this high quality of impact. The sense of the source, of the potency of the source, and this little book also has that. Which is why I think he included this such a lengthy footnote from it. Okay, let's see what's next. Oh yeah, so now we're getting into we're talking about mantra shastra. Right. Okay. Back to the text. Could we get a reader, please?
Kirsten, do you want to read?
Be touch. Oh, touch. In taking up the subject of the second sense, that of touch, we must note that this sense is preeminently the sense of very great importance in this, the second solar system, a system of astral Buddhic consciousness. Each of these senses, after having reached a certain point, begins to synthesize with the others in such a way that it is almost impossible to know where one begins and the other ends. Touch is that innate recognition of contact through the exercise of manas or mind in a threefold manner, as recognition, as memory, as anticipation. Each of the five senses, when coupled with manas, develops within the subject a concept embodying the past, the present, and the future.
Thank you. First, touch. In taking up the subject of the second sense, that of touch, we must note that this sense is preeminently the sense of very great importance in this, the second solar system, a system of astral Buddhic consciousness. So numerological correlation through the number 2 makes the sense of touch preeminent in our astral Buddhic solar system. In fact, none of the other senses can actually operate without this factor of touch. For all senses use the medium of impression, and impression itself, at least in this solar system, is an outgrowth of the sense of touch. Let's take a look at the footnote referenced by the term astral Buddhic consciousness. Quote, astral Buddhic consciousness is the term applied to the basic consciousness in our solar system. It is characterized by emotion, by feeling, sensation, which have eventually to be transmuted into intuition, spiritual perception, and unity. So this is the purpose. This underscores one of the fundamental purposes of the path of becoming in this solar system, which is this transition from emotion to intuition and spiritual perception. And that really represents the functional link between the astral and Buddhic types of consciousness, which has its root in the fact that we are in the second of 3 major solar systems. DK further emphasizes the preeminence of the number 2 in this system early in a treatise on cosmic fire. Could we get a reader for this paragraph, please?
Magda, do you want to read?
The divine flame is formed on the second plane, the monadic, and magnetism, which is a method of demonstrating radiatory fire, is therefore felt paramountly on the 4th and 6th planes, or through the Buddhic and astral vehicles. These are, as we know, closely allied to the second plane.
Okay, so whereas the footnote describes this astral Buddhic consciousness, which is preeminently the consciousness of our solar system, here we learned the source of this astral Buddhic connection, which is actually monadic, right? He says, these are, as we know, closely allied to the second plane. Right, it's really the source of demonstration of the 4th and 6th planes, this monadic fire of the second plane. Okay. So next, each of these senses, after having reached a certain point, begin to synthesize with the others in such a way that it is almost impossible to know where one begins and the other ends. We were just talking about this. This synthesis becomes more pronounced on each higher subplane of the cosmic physical plane. DK describes the 3 stages during which the senses are developed, refined, and finally synthesized a bit later in TCF. Can we get a reader, please?
Miri, you want to read?
Yes. Involution, the separation of matter or the one becoming the many. Senses are developed and the apparatus is perfected by the self for the utilization of matter. This is under the law of economy. Evolution up to the time of the probatory path, the merging of spirit and matter, and the utilization of the senses in a progressing identification of the self with all forms from the lowest to those relatively refined. This is under the law of attraction. Evolution on the path. Again, the separation of spirit from matter, its identification with the one, and the ultimate rejection of form. The senses then are synthesized into acquired faculty, and the self has no further use for the not self. It blends with the all self. This is under the law of synthesis.
Thank you, Mady. So with this, we get a correlation with the 3 laws of, of economy, of attraction, and of synthesis. All of this works together, right? And we see here the progression of the senses and how they are used. First, identification with the not self, and then a progressive identification with the self, and finally a complete negation of the not self. Okay. Next, touch is that innate recognition of contact through the exercise of manas or mind in a threefold manner, as recognition, as memory, as anticipation. So let's take a look at what MDR has to say about this passage. Could we get a reader, please?
Scott, do you want to read?
Sure. In this definition of touch, it is interesting to understand that it is inseparable from the exercise of manas or mind. There may be contact of many kinds, and yet the sense of touch remains dormant because there is no manasic recognition of the touch. The touch is not noticed. The focus of touch in the past, present, and future are here given. Touch in relation to the past may be experienced through memory. Touch in relation to the present may be experienced through recognition. Touch in relation to the future may be experienced through anticipation. In relation to the future, touch and the factor of faith are closely related. If there is contact and one is not aware of the contact, has the sense of touch been activated? It would seem not.
Thank you, Scott. Any thoughts, questions about any of this? All right. Finally, each of the five senses, when coupled with manas, develops within the subject a concept embodying the past, the present, and the future. So if manas is not present, obviously the senses may be active, but no concept of the past, present, and future can exist. For example, though animals have the five senses active, and in some cases developed far beyond human capacity, there is nonetheless only a rudimentary sense of past and present, and no sense of future, because the monastic principle is not yet activated. Without manas, there can be no categorization of sensory impression into past, present, and future. Okay. Next up, can we get a reader, please?
Tom, do you want to read?
Yep. Therefore, when a man is very highly evolved, has transcended time as known in the three worlds, and can therefore look at the three lower planes from the standpoint of the eternal now, he has superseded the senses by full active consciousness. He knows and needs not the senses to guide him any longer to knowledge. But in time and in the three worlds, each sense on each plane is employed to convey to the thinker some aspect of the non-self, and by the aid of mind, the thinker can then adjust his relationship thereto. Hearing gives him an idea of relative direction and enables a man to fix his place in the scene and to locate himself. Touch gives him an idea of relative quantity and enables him to fix his relative value as regards other bodies extraneous to himself.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, first, therefore, when a man is very highly evolved, has transcended time, as known in the three worlds, and can therefore look at the three lower planes from the standpoint of the eternal now, he has superseded the senses by full active consciousness. Quote, he knows and needs not the sense to guide him any longer to knowledge. So we see here that Transcending time as it applies to the three worlds is directly related to transcending the relationship between manas and the senses. Awareness of past, present, and future is only a stage of becoming, experienced by human beings up to the time that they transcend the mental plane and move into Buddhic consciousness. At that point, past, present, and future no longer hold the consciousness in bondage, and they can, quote, look at the three lower planes from the standpoint of the eternal now. Buddhic and later Atmic consciousness further synthesizes the time continuum, allowing the past, present, and future to be experienced not only simultaneously, but also as something much more than the sum of these three experiences of reality, for it can reach forwards and backwards simultaneously, and yet at the same time perceive the present as a synthesis of the three, fully in the moment. This is what DK calls the eternal now. I think it's also what's ultimately meant by be here now. That's the, this is the final goal of this synthesis of the time continuum. Parallel to this transformation of an initiate's experience of time is a shift from reception through five senses to a reception by means of the sixth and seventh, the correlative and synthetic senses. We might hypothesize that as long as one still gathers information through the five separated senses, one is also under the spell of past, present, and future. Through implementation of the correlative and synthetic senses, this fragmented condition eventually gives way to a perception of and participation in what DK calls the eternal now, a state of consciousness that reveals that which underlies all attribute and transcends the past, present, and future time continuum altogether. Those who have achieved this state are truly, quote unquote, in the world, but not of it, even while registering the flow of time that characterizes the lower quaternary. MDR makes the point that astrologically, this represents the transition from Saturn, time, space, sense, and sequence, to Uranus, simultaneity, essence, fusion, and synthesis. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay, next. Oh, I see Joe's hand. Yes, Joe?
The thought I have here is that we're looking at hearing and touch, rays 1 and 2, and that the mind that we generally work with here and now, it's really the third ray. And what I'm suggesting is that level of using one's mind as we evolve here on this plane is really a transitional, I don't know, it's obvious when I say it. It is our transitional place. We move from the lower to the higher as we're working in the, I lost it again, the abstract mind.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's interesting how the three senses, the three fundamental senses, have lower and higher counterparts, right? And so we can draw upon the higher counterpart of each sense. Let me explain myself first. Like the sense of hearing is present on both physical and atmic. The sense of touch characterizes both the astral and Buddhic planes, and finally the sense of sight, the higher and lower mind. So we can, for instance, with the sense of touch, which is preeminent in this solar system, we can use that sense in its higher correspondence of this sense to draw ourselves from the astral to the Buddhic condition. Okay, you know what else? All right, so next up. But in time and in the three worlds, each sense on each plane is employed to convey to the thinker some aspect of the not self. And by the aid of mind, the thinker can then adjust his relationship thereto. So the five senses are mediators and thus give mediated knowledge. You know, they stand between the actual reality of the thing sensed and the thinker, right? Direct knowing synthesizes mediated knowledge, which is ever conditioned by the mind, the medium through which knowledge is gained. Direct knowing comes to the initiate through identification with the one life, the source of all knowledge. And that in turn is gained through the higher correspondence of the senses on the Buddhic and Atmic planes, you know, such as total comprehension, right? Which is literally a window into the reality of the all self, as are all those senses. Whereas sensory mediated knowledge reveals the not self, direct knowing reveals the self. Nonetheless, on the path of evolution, we must first work with the mediating sensory agencies, just as we must work with past, present, and future, which by gradually and progressively revealing the not self allows us eventually to turn to what's left, really, which is to unveil the true self. All the entire realm of not self is first identified, not this, not that, not this, not that, niet. And finally, one is faced with the true self. Next, hearing gives an idea of relative direction and enables a man to fix his place in the scheme and to locate himself. This statement reveals how closely the sense of hearing is related to the establishment and maintenance of the illusion of time and space, and thus of the illusion of separation. The fact that hearing conveys the impression of direction, location, and distance makes it a prime means of relating the time-space sphere or cube of space that defines the physical plane. Let's take a look at MDR's astrological observations on the sense of hearing. Can we get a reader, please?
And Parker.
Okay. Saturn, the planet of hearing, might also be called the planet of location, for it convinces the consciousness that its apparatus can only be in one place at one time. If here, then not there. If there, then not here. Location means fixity of position, and Saturn is one of the major planets of fixation. Vulcan may be another, and Mars cannot be left out of the consideration. The sign ruling the ears and hearing, Taurus, ruled initially by fifth ray Venus, contributes to the sense of here and not there, and Vulcan, the esoteric ruler of Taurus, anchors the consciousness in one location by means of a body apparently attached to the earth. For all its higher potentials, Vulcan has a materialistic effect upon the consciousness in the early stages of development.
Thank you, Anne. Thoughts or questions about this? Any of you astrologers want to chime in on this assessment? Interesting info on the nature of Saturn. Okay, next, touch gives him an idea of relative quantity, enables him to fix his relative value as regards other bodies extraneous to himself. So touch, the sense most associated with the astral plane, is relational and thus enhances our ability to compare between, for example, hot and cold, coarse and fine, but also between desirable and undesirable, dangerous and comforting, etc., and more astral qualities, right? Touch is both the most intimate and the most intrusive of all the senses. MDR notes that DK's phrase relative values relates to both Venus and Taurus, both of which incline towards tactility as well as a keen sense of the visual. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
And Veronica.
Sight gives him an idea of proportion and enables him to adjust his movement to the movement of others. Taste gives him an idea of value and enables him to fix upon that which to him appears best. Smell gives him an idea of innate quality and enables him to find that which appeals to him as of the same quality or essence as himself. In all these definitions, it is necessary to bear in mind that the whole object of the senses is to reveal the not-self and to enable the self, therefore, to differentiate between the real and the unreal. In the evolution of the senses, hearing is the first vague something which calls attention of the apparently blind self. To another vibration, B, to something originating outside of itself. C, to the concept of externality. When sound is first contacted, the consciousness for the first time becomes aware of that which is without.
Thank you, Anne Veronica. Okay, first, sight gives him an idea of proportion and enables him to adjust his movements to the movements of others. So the idea of proportion drives our ability to assess that which appears in our visual field. We see the great and small and assess their shapes, thus determining their familiarity and importance in whatever context we are employing, our sense of sight. Subjectively, a well-developed sense of proportion provides an antidote to glamour, right? So this is a subjective sense of the use of proportion. That's the emergence of the sense of sight enables man to escape from the emotional glamour ruled by the sense of touch, which reigned supreme in Atlantean times, just as sight is the primary sense in our current Aryan root race. The sense of sight also keeps movement within proportional bounds. When people's movements are regulated, social living becomes possible. MDR relates the sense of sight to Libra, which rules the Ajna center and relates to both the right and left eyes, as well as to the central eye. Venus, an important planet of sight, is the exoteric ruler of Libra. Next, taste gives him an idea of value and enables him to fix upon that which to him appears best. Taste reveals whether or not that which is tasted, quote unquote, is assimilable by the taster, whether it will be of value if incorporated into his or her system. Taste, as in she has good taste, develops and elevates our sense of desire and thus acts to regulate that which we choose to assimilate. Subjectively speaking, the more keenly attuned we are to assimilating that which is useful, meaningful, and beautiful, the quicker and healthier our growth, and thus the more rapid the trajectory of our fulfillment of our purpose on the path. Next, smell gives him an idea of innate quality and enables him to find that which appeals to him as of the same quality or essence as himself. The sense of smell is both the most internal and external of the senses. It is closely related to the animal brain and is often highly developed in the animal kingdom. But it is also a highly metaphysical sense, bringing the one who employs the sense of smell in touch with the essence of the other. The sense of hearing, touch, and sight are relatively external compared to the fourth and fifth senses, which allow the one who senses the ability to achieve a high degree of intimate awareness of the not self. Any thoughts or questions? Okay. Next, in all these definitions, it is necessary to bear in mind that the whole object of the senses is to reveal the not self and to enable the self, therefore, to differentiate between the real and the unreal. Lead me from darkness to light, from the unreal to the real. So refining the senses leads to a deeper realization of the nature of the not self. Attachment to all aspects of the not self veils the self. Deep sense recognition of the not self reveals its true nature, allowing us to disidentify ourselves from it. Let's take a look at the footnote, which is a quote from Serpent Power by Arthur Avalon, and is referenced by the phrase to differentiate between the real and unreal. Could we get a reader for this first half of the footnote, please?
Barbara, do you want to read?
Sensations aroused by sense objects are experiences by means of the outer instruments of the Lord of the body, or senses, Indriya, which are the pathway through which the jiva receives worldly experience. These are 10 in number and are of two classes. A, the 5 organs of sensation, Yanindriya. 1, the ear, hearing. 2, skin, feeling by touch. 3, eye, sight. 4, tongue, taste. 5, nose, smell. B, the 5 organs of action. Karmendriya. 1, mouth, speaking. 2, hands, grasping. 3, legs, walking. 4, anus, excretion. 5, genitals, procreation.
Thank you, Barbara. So this is pretty straightforward. The important distinction here being made is the receptive nature of the first group and the active and thus karma creating nature of the second group. Any thoughts or questions? Okay, next, the second half of the footnote. Can we get a reader, please?
Gordon, you want to read?
The organs of sensation are the reactive response which itself makes to sensation. The organs of action are those through which effect is given to the jiva's desires. The indriya or sense is not a physical organ, but the faculty of mind operating through that organ as its instrument. The outward sense organs are the usual means whereby the physical plane, on the physical plane, the functions of hearing and so forth are accomplished. But as they are mere instruments and their power is derived from the mind, a yogi may accomplish by the mind only all that may be done by means of these physical organs without the use of the latter. The three functions of attention, selection, and synthesizing are the discrete manifold of the senses, and those belonging to that aspect of the mental body, the internal agent called manas. Just as manas is necessary to the senses, the latter are necessary for manas. Manas is thus the leading indriya of which the senses are powers.
Thank you. Okay, first, the organs of sensation are the reactive response which the self makes to sensation. The organs of action are those through which effect is given to the jiva's desires. These two sentences relate to the chart just given, right? So the organs of sensation, ears, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose are quote, the reactive response to which the self makes to sensation. Said another way, the organs of sensation are the means by which the self, the indweller, is able to have a reactive response, for they are the self's portals into the threefold world of human endeavor. The second sentence, which refers to the five organs of action, seems reasonable and accurate, though for most, the anus does not function in order to fulfill the desired nature. We might also hypothesize that before Atlantean times, all the organs of action were activated by instinct rather than by desire. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay. Next, the indriya or sense is not the physical organ, but the faculty of mind operating through that organ as its instrument. This is an important, it seems obvious, but if you think about it, we often confuse the organ of reception with the sense itself. Sense is actually a mental faculty that responds to some particular vibrational impact that is channeled to the brain / consciousness from one of the physical organs. Next. The outward sense organs are the usual means whereby on the physical plane the functions of hearing and so forth are accomplished. But as they are mere instruments and their power is derived from the mind, a yogi may accomplish by the mind only, all that may be done by means of these physical organs without the use of the latter. This is done by mastering the inner faculties through which the jiva desires to experience that which the senses normally make available. There's a whole disciplines of yoga that are oriented towards this hatha yogic ability to be able to hear on the inner side and see on the inner side without the agency of ears and eyes. Next, how are we doing on time? We are done, but I'm going to finish this and go over just a couple of minutes. The three functions of attention, selection, and synthesizing the discrete manifold of the senses are those belonging to that aspect of the mental body, the internal agent called manas. So I think we'll stop here, pick up right here, because it's going to take a while to go on through. So Good class. Thank you all for participating, and especially those of you who actively participated. It's much appreciated. Dialogue is always more interesting than monologue.